Hello, everyone. Today, I'm incredibly excited to dive into probably the hottest topic on LinkedIn in the last 24 hours. I'm pretty sure every third post right now has been about the recent vendor terminations. So, what better person to bring onto LinkedIn than Carolyn Sarnoff from Pattern, the in house experts on this topic? Carolyn, thank you so much for hopping on.
Of course. Thanks so much for having me.
I'm really excited. We've had about 30 minutes of chatting before this, and we're also going to be releasing a podcast where we dive much deeper into all the topics we're covering for LinkedIn. But just super high level, Carolyn, can you explain to everyone what is happening on the One Piece side? I think there's a lot of fear baiting in the space, but maybe you could give us some more context on what we're seeing.
Yeah. So, like you said, I think this topic is exploding on LinkedIn, all over social media. But what happened earlier this week was that a number of 1P vendors received a form notification that Amazon has made the decision to stop sourcing their products. And that is effective November 9th. So, basically, these vendors have been given kind of 60-day notice that they will stop receiving POs from Amazon and they will have to transition to a 3P model to continue to list their assortment in the Amazon store.
Do you feel like this is a surprise?
I was not surprised, if I'm honest. I mean, I think this is consistent with a number of decisions that Amazon has made in the past. And so I think that Amazon is continually looking to optimize the way they do things. And this is just probably part of a regular assessment of what brands are better suited for a 3P relationship versus 1P.
100%. On one
With
hand, I
that,
think it'll drive a lot
so
of operational efficiency. I think that's always one of Amazon's key focuses. But on the secondary side, I also think it's going to improve probably vendor relations on the enterprise side. Those brands that really need that extra touch, I think it's going to help. So I don't see it being a bad thing. I think it's a little bit scary. The termination notice is very scary, but I think it ends up working out for brands who are able to move on to the next step, which we're going to dive into.
totally agree. You took some of the words out of my mouth, which is I think I don't want to understate kind of the change or how jarring this might have been. But I think that some brands might find that they could even have a better experience selling on Amazon
Yeah.
as part of a 3P model. I think there's going to be a huge learning curve, but I think these brands are, many of these brands are incredible and will figure out how to navigate it.
Most
And hopefully we
definitely.
can hopefully we can give a few tips and help them do so.
Yes, I think that's the part that one excites me about this conversation is there's a lot of very actionable recommendations. Before diving into that, I've seen a few different posting. It's like $5 to $15 million a year brands. Is that what you're seeing? Has there been any actual release on the style of brands that are primarily getting the termination notice?
Just like you said, we don't know exactly how many brands or which ones specifically. But I think to your point, it's fair to assume that these are generally vendors that fall below some volume threshold. So likely vendors with less than $10 million in annual revenue on Amazon.
That makes sense. So you get this notice, you panic. Everyone's allowed to panic. I'll give you like 3 to 4 days to get that out of your system. What do you think the biggest next steps are? I mean, it's kind of a decision like, hey, should we work with a partner or do we try
Mhm.
to build this out in-house? Do we piece together hiring agencies? What do you think the first conversation needs to be had if you get this notice?
Totally. I mean, the first thing is like, this is whether these brands are prepared or not, this is happening. And so I think being really proactive in terms of thinking through what is their strategy, right? And I think the first step is creating a Seller Central account. What many folks might not know is that Seller Central is a completely different tool and platform than Vendor Central. They were built independent of one another. And so making that transition, there's absolutely going to be a learning curve. So what I would say for any brand navigating this change is really, again, to just like take that first step, create a Seller Central account and start to get familiar because it's a different set of tools. It's a different set of reports. The timing of this is very interesting, right? Like I think POs will stop effective November 9th. With that, the deadline for sending inventory in for this Black Friday, Cyber Monday shopping period, otherwise known as Turkey 5 for those who have worked in retail. And so it is possible that brands can take advantage of that key selling period with their existing 1P relationship. And I think that is most likely to be the least disruptive. But there may be some who look at it and say, I'd rather just make this cut over now. I just, kind of really lean in. And so I think there are a few really important considerations. It's been really interesting at Pattern to hear the number of brands, really of all sizes, some of whom really feel like a 3P relationship is better, right?
Yeah.
Like there's more control. Things like pricing, things like how much inventory do you want to send in to Amazon? So there is this huge benefit in terms of control. With that, you also have to be ready for it, right? So Amazon used to do all of that on their behalf. The pricing was automated. It kind of fluctuated with the market. Same thing on inventory management, right? Like Amazon has years of experience in terms of the algorithms that drive their forecasting and ordering. And so brands will have to figure that out for themselves. And so a huge part of that is figuring out what do they now need to own, what are tools that they might need, right? Like they're probably going to be wanting to talk to different vendors about who can help them take these things on, as well as consider things like an external partnership. So
Yeah.
if they, not to be too self-serving, but there are e-commerce accelerators like Pattern, where we will buy inventory on a brand's behalf and apply our technology and our team of experts to help them sell via a 3P model. And so that could help preserve some of the continuity of actually selling your inventory to someone else as opposed to directly into a customer.
I think that's an incredibly important call out because there's kind of this divide. Everyone who started on the seller side of the space, like the private label side of the space, is always like, 3Ps easy, go that route immediately. But I think they're not considering the organizational chart aspect of who needs to be hired and how you justify that to an internal brand team. Most established brands that have been selling into retail, in my opinion, are under supported on the e-commerce side as is. So when they're looking at a 1P, 3P transition, they are prime for an e-commerce accelerator, in my opinion. But for those who don't think an accelerator is the best fit, something along those lines, how would you oversimplify the categories of roles that are needed if you're used to relying on a vendor model with having a ton of Amazon support? Oversimplified, when you switch to a seller model, what are the categories of operations that need to be managed that you need to hire for?
Totally. Such a good question. And I will likely forget some things, but I think at a very like simplified, high level, the first is you need someone to determine your assortment strategy. I think Amazon takes the position that, it's Earth's largest selection. And so they really want to carry everything. But I think there are some products, right, that are obviously higher volume in e-commerce and on Amazon than other channels. So having someone very focused on what works well um, from an assortment perspective for that brand is super important. And then also, how do you tell that product story, right? How do you tell your brand and product story on Amazon? So you need to have a team that's really responsible for the creative operations and making sure you have the right imagery, and using Amazon does have a number of tools to help optimize listings, but operationally speaking, a brand would need to have someone who's really managing all of that. Again, both from kind of like how's your brand represented, but also how is each individual listing represented. I talked a little bit about pricing earlier. I think again, Amazon has some tools that you can enroll in to kind of keep your price competitive with the market, but you certainly want to be paying attention there. And I think I don't want to understate the complexity of the operational component, right? I think whereas before a brand can just ship, there's some preparation and some requirements, but there's a different set of operational requirements for inventory to be received, right? And it needs to be sent to a certain number of places. And I think Amazon has introduced new fees, right? It's like you can't have too much inventory, you can't have too little inventory. You have to send to a certain number of fulfillment centers. And so there's just a huge amount of complexity baked into that. And so I would say I wouldn't understate the complexity and kind of the team members you would need focused just on kind of the forecasting and actually preparing inventory for shipment into Amazon.
That's a whole team. I don't
Totally.
see a lot of experts in the space that can go really deep on all of those categories and do them incredibly well unless they're just insanely passionate about the industry, which there is. But all of that to say, when you're considering that 1P, 3P transition, having a partner that can help get you off the ground is really important. Whether that is an agency and accelerator or hiring the right people in house. It's a really big step. And that's why 1P is preferred for, large org charts. I don't want to say it's less risky because situations like this happen, but operationally it's easier to manage, in my opinion. And I know back in my day, like when I first got started 7 years ago, and is being crapped out is still a term that people use. Does Amazon still
Sure
use that?
is. Yep. I
Is it
mean,
still a thing?
it was at least 14 months ago.
Okay,
So
great. So 7 years ago, we were working with a ton of brands that were dealing with can't realize a profit situation on the vendor side, and we were recommending the 1P 3P split at the time. Is that still a strategy that's recommended at all?
it could be, yeah. Brands can absolutely take a hybrid approach, right? Where
Yeah.
they have, assuming that it's still an option available to them to be 1P, right? And sometimes Amazon makes the decision for
Yeah.
a brand on both sides, right? Whether they will say you must be, we're terminating our 1P relationship, or in some cases, there are brands who are 1P who would like to be 3P, and
Yeah.
Amazon doesn't want that either. But with that said, I think a hybrid strategy is still, for some brands, it's still a very
Yeah.
viable strategy for sure.
Amazing. We can dive more on some of that later. I believe on the LinkedIn side, we're close to wrapping up. I'm going to continue pushing record though. I think we're just going to
Perfect.
run with it because it's been incredibly engaging, I feel like, and a great conversation. So, for
Yeah.
everyone who's listened this far and wants more hands on keyboard recommendations, you're facing this situation. Again, look for the link in the comments. We're going to be posting the full episode there. So, thank you all so much. And thank you, Carolyn, for joining. But now
Thank
to
you. This is so fun.
this is so fun. I'm really excited. Our podcast may be a little bit more exciting and fun now that we have more time, and we may have to put a hard stop on this, or else I'll keep you here for a few hours.
I can talk your ear off for as long as you will let me.
This is what the industry needs. Well, I think a good starting point, Carolyn. We've talked about this. You've obviously proven that you're an expert in the situation. Would you like to give a little bit of background of how you got started in the space and what's made you an expert on this topic?
Of course. So I will take you all the way back because it's a little bit funny. But my first job out of college, I worked at Salesforce.com, and I had studied art history. And so I had a manager who was like, "You have so much potential, but you are really lacking that like foundational business knowledge." And so I went to business school. And as I was looking for full-time roles, I was really interested in software as a service and cloud computing coming from Salesforce. And so I got really interested in AWS. And I went through Amazon's recruiting process and effectively, like actually very kindly, they were like, "It is so cute. You want to do AWS, but you have like no technical expertise. We think you would be a great fit for retail." And so I came in as part of a retail leadership development program. And so that was I don't know that I fully appreciated it at the time, but it was an amazing way to start my kind of post MBA career and really learn the ins and outs of both Amazon and e-commerce and getting to work with some really incredible brands. So I stayed for 13 years, largely in category roles, all on the retail side. I was a category leader, managing, a few different P&Ls. Largely within consumer electronics. And then the last 2 years I spent in Amazon's private brands. And so with that, a number of my like wonderful Amazon coworkers had actually made the move over to Pattern. And it was just too tempting. So I think it was to work with such amazing people, but it was, it was a very cool experience to come from Amazon, which is incredibly customer obsessed,
Yeah.
to come to a company that is both customer obsessed, but also very brand obsessed and
Yeah.
is really an advocate for brands who are taking on the very hard work of managing e-commerce businesses.
That's incredible. How many years has that been, would you say? The e-commerce side.
Well, so it's been 14.
Ah, that's crazy. And so much has changed and the industry has moved so incredibly quick.
Oh my gosh. Well, it's funny. I was thinking a lot about how much things have changed just thinking about this, 1P kind of termination. I was just thinking about like, okay, how did we get here? And you'd asked, was I surprised? And I'm going to date myself a little bit here, but 10 years ago, when I was a vendor manager, the goal for many of us was just to add as much selection as possible.
Yeah.
And the default was 1P. The reason for that was at the time, the 1P relationship was just the best way for Amazon to ensure a great customer experience, competitive pricing, being in stock, making sure the inventory is in a place where it can get that fast track messaging. But that 1P model is also a really expensive way of controlling customer experience. Back in my day, and again, I sound so like I'm very like e-commerce. I'm an e-commerce geriatric. Um, when we set up new ASINs, we would also then buy at least one unit of every single ASIN. And when I worked in the lawn and garden category, there was an outdoor decor brand that we had been chasing for years. And we finally signed them. And we placed a PO for, amongst many other things, a life-sized Yeti garden statue. Yep, this thing is 6 feet tall, 150 pounds, $3,000. Believe it or not, it was not the fastest mover. And I mean, that's an extreme example, but at the scale that Amazon was adding selection,
Yeah.
it meant a huge aggregate investment in inventory and risking tying up working capital, warehouse capacity on potentially really slow moving selection. And so I think Amazon over time has certainly evolved its approach and its guardrails around buying and inventory management. But I think we've seen this shift as Amazon has also invested in tools for 3P sellers that bring the customer experience associated with 1P versus 3P much closer into parity. It makes so much sense, right, that we would start to see this type of theme where Amazon's making these decisions all the time and they're optimizing not just for their own operational efficiency, but also for customer experience and brand experience as well.
100%. I got started in the space when everyone would submit a vendor central PO, or they would have, there was like a hack in order to get access to AMS. Our name was originally Better AMS because we only managed Amazon Marketing Services, which at the time was HSAs, headline search ads, and PDAs, product display ads. So they closed the loop on that. They combined all advertising into one platform. I think seeing things like Search Query Performance Report being rolled out, and even just in general, I think a lot of the Seller Central reporting and analytic types are a lot more advantageous than what we get access to on the vendor side. So that was a good tell of the bet that they were making, because it wouldn't be too difficult, I feel like, just from an API perspective, roll them over to the same platforms. But the fact that they were investing as much as they were in Seller Central as a whole was kind of a, hey, they're probably going to move in this direction.
It is really cool, I think, in many ways, right? Like there are a bunch of considerations in 1P versus 3P, but I think if you're just comparing some of the self-service tools, I think they're arguably more powerful on the
Yeah.
3P side. So it is a cool opportunity for many brands.
If you can build out the team. And I think that's going to be a
That's
fear
true.
for people. Honestly, it's difficult because I feel like I'm in the world of managing so many brands that have just succeeded and done so well in 3P. So that's what I'm used to. But I still frequently will talk to vendors that have a 2-person operation managing 100 million plus year brands, which is insane to consider on the seller side. Like you said, just the assortment, the creative, the advertising takes a full scale team. But a lot of these vendors have been able to ride the coattails of Vendor Central. And it's going to seem really scary to make that transition. And I recently got asked a question I was auditing a brand, and it's a large vendor, and their Amazon advertising has been managed really poorly. And they're like, we have so much on our plate already. How do we trust that our agency is doing the right job? And we kind of started talking. They were like, we're taking the accreditations, we're doing all of this, which is an incredible route, but they already have so much on their plate. So what do you think the best step is from an education perspective? Again, it's a really large transition operationally from 1P to 3P. Where do you start? How do you not get overwhelmed with everything that there is to learn?
Totally. And I think before I answer that, I kind of want to double down on your point just about all of the work, right? I think it could be $100 million brand that might be on Amazon.com, right? Alone, when you think about all of the different marketplaces in North America, you think about all of the, oftentimes totally different marketplaces in other countries. That complexity and that work just it grows exponentially really, really fast. And e-commerce teams are super small, right? We
They're
actually
always the
did.
leanest and the
I know,
youngest.
right? I know. I think I will stop belaboring the point, but I think we did a kind of an executive snapshot at Pattern earlier this year. We found that the average e-commerce team is about 5 people, and again,
Insane.
that's small just for managing a domestic Amazon business. So, anyway, that's where, and again, I am certainly a bit biased here, but that is where I think it's so important to find a partner. And I think that partnership can take many forms. I think there are all kinds of different solutions, and whether that's services, whether that's technology, that can help brands navigate this like very complex and often changing e-commerce landscape. And so I think setting aside some time to evaluate different options. Do you want to pull together a number of different point solutions, right? I think that's a very viable strategy. You could also work with a partner that does it all. And that's really what Pattern has evolved into. We can manage the creative, the pricing, the logistics, the advertising. So again, I think it's really, really hard to do without outside partnerships. And I don't know that there's a right answer for what that partnership should look like, but I think it has to start there.
I would also throw out that it's really dependent on the stage of business you're in and your internal team that you currently have. Not that I'm recommending anyone go transition out. I'm sure, like you, all retention rate's always a really core focus. But at the very beginning, I would almost recommend you start with that full service accelerator.
Mhm.
I've seen way too many brands struggle to piece it together. They're cocky, they go into it and they're like, these 3 people internally can figure it out. And they syndicate their copy from Walmart and their website. They have terrible main images. There's so many very niche best practices for everything that you and I have mentioned so far that you really need an in-house expert. So we kind of recommend if you're hard stop making that transition, work with a full service partner and then start
Mm.
piecing together the areas that maybe you can build a team on if that goal is to go in-house or work with who you already have and piece together what's missing.
Totally. And I think one thing I wanted to call out is that working with a partner like an accelerator, that doesn't take the place of an in-house e-commerce team, right? It's like, just speaking from kind of Pattern experience, we really want to be an extension of the e-commerce team. And we
You're
need
the
that
expert.
team. Exactly. And we need the e-commerce team to be focused on what they do best, which is bringing amazing customer love products
Yeah.
to market, right? Like that's where a lot of their focus should be. And again, we have some of the scale and the technology and the people expertise to really execute. But it's not like any of these solutions, I think, fully replace the in-house team. It's just we can
Yeah.
kind of complement and help you do more, help you do it faster.
Yeah. 100%. I mean, just Amazon advertising, my area of expertise, you need
Mm-hmm.
a really good bid management solution. You need
Yep.
an incredible keyword harvesting, keyword research solution. You need reporting and analytics. That's not even layering in needing a DSPC, needing access to AMC and someone who knows SQL, campaign structure, creative, copy, AI. All of that is my siloed wheelhouse, which is such a small percent of the business. Then you relate that subject matter or expertise to creative, to inventory, to forecasting, to understanding demand within a category. And that does not scale out well. And I wanted to ask, like, what are the biggest mistakes that you see being made? I'm going to say that mine is, teams trying to do everything and be experts at everything and then becoming generalists. But what else do you see in this space?
I mean, I think it's underestimating the differences between the
Yep.
different models in selling on Amazon, right? You might know one and be switching to another for one reason or another, whether that's your choice or not. But again, I think are there's so much complexity in figuring out what the right strategy is. And so failing to, I think, really dig into the pros and cons. Again, I don't know that there is a singular right answer, and so I'm not here
As
to
with
tell you
everything, it
exactly what to
depends.
do. Right? Exactly. It's all a series of trade-offs. And so I think I think I'm probably just building on what you're saying, which is you know, underestimating the complexity and thinking there's going to be a silver bullet and one right answer. It's really about saying, okay, what are the pros and cons, or what are the trade-offs of different strategies and different ways of tackling this, and what's the one that feels right for
Yeah.
your brand and the number of people you have and what your expertise is. And I think one of the reasons I love e-commerce is because it's such a big and growing segment and there's room for everyone to play, right? It's like whether you're a full service accelerator, whether you specialize a bit more like you do, right? Like I think we can all learn from each other a ton. And so for me, I think the biggest the biggest piece of advice I have, unsolicited advice, I guess, since you didn't actually ask,
Oh, it's
is
100% solicited at this point. Come on.
look for partners who don't tell you that they can be your end all be all, right? It's like look for partners who listen to other folks in the industry, listen to partners who want to learn, work with partners who want to learn from others. And so, and are willing to share some of those best practices. So I think that, again, I just think that's the really fun part of e-commerce is that the community is so big and there are so many different roles, different people can play within it. And so look for partners who want to be talking to other people and learning. So
100%. That mentality makes a huge difference. I mean, the space changes so quick.
oh my
There's
gosh, so
Amazon will
fast.
roll something out, and I'm like, okay, well, we're going in a whole different direction now. You really have to have that positive mindset and just embrace all of the changes. And you really have to rely
Totally.
on the people in your network as well. For example, when this goes viral on LinkedIn and I'm not the expert to talk about it, and I can reach out to Carolyn, and within 12 hours, she's on here, like, those are the people you want in this space. So huge shout out to you for turning
Exactly.
this around as quickly as you did.
Well, I mean, same. We do our big annual e-commerce conference called Accelerate, which we hold every May in Salt Lake City. And, Destiny, you were a speaker. You were one of the most popular speakers sharing your expertise on Amazon advertising. And so I would just say right back at you.
Well, we've talked a lot about positive things. We've transitioned from the cons of 1P, 3P,
Mm-hmm.
and operationally. I wanted to ask, do you think there's any risk staying on 1P for those mid-sized brands? Would you go ahead and say, let's make the move and start at least considering and looking at a 3P model or?
I mean, I would, of course, say it's worth evaluating. But
Mhm.
again, I think it needs to be done very much eyes wide open,
Yeah.
right? I think even when you think about your company cash flows in a
Right.
1P model, you are receiving those POs often on a, domestically, often on a weekly cycle. And it's very predictable versus you move into a 3P selling model and you are getting paid once, that demand
Yeah.
actualizes. And so again, it's just there are a huge number of considerations. I don't think that one is necessarily right or
Yeah.
wrong. And so I guess what I would say is it's certainly worth evaluating.
Yeah.
And again, I think it really comes down to the control as
Yeah.
a third party seller. You have more control over your pricing, over how much
Yeah.
inventory you ship in, and I think that's both a blessing and a curse where you have more of that control, but you also need to be ready to manage it. You need to be
Yeah.
ready to get it right.
For the brands that have the teams that are ready, I think we've talked about a few of the biggest pros. In my opinion, it's control and
Mm-hmm.
access to better tech, better insights. Is there anything else that you feel like we've missed that you're like, hey, 100% you are going to get this better on Seller Central in a 3P model?
I think you have largely touched on it. I think it's um, the tools are very, very good on Seller Central. I think the one just kind of watch out, I guess I would say, is just again the kind of the inventory forecasting, and it's a huge mental model. It's a
Yeah.
huge mental model shift to think about. Okay, what is as you're forecasting POs from Amazon versus forecasting actual customer demand.
Yeah, completely agree. Well, we've thrown out a lot. I'm going
Mhm.
to lightly exit out of this one and say if we didn't cover anything, anyone has any questions, definitely drop them in the comments. The whole pattern team is typically incredible on LinkedIn. Big shout out to Dan. So I'm sure someone will be in the comments that can answer any further questions for you. Our team's always more than happy to help. Carolyn, do you have any favorite clients in this space? This
We
is your
are a
opportunity. Are you going to take the Amazon route and PR it or?
I'm gonna have to remain a little bit neutral. We have some incredible brand partners who make just incredible products, and I think that's honestly my favorite part of my job is getting to work with such amazing brands who are constantly innovating and just really want to be able to tell their brand story, and who like love, who are just amazing partners to us. So anyway, I love them all equally.
Okay. Okay. All right. That's a very motherly answer. But I will give a huge shout out. You mentioned Patterns Accelerate event earlier, and I will say it's one of my absolute favorites. I think you always see it posted everywhere on LinkedIn. You guys do an incredible job. But when you are there, you really start to understand the scope of Patterns accomplishments. I mean, just some of the brands that you have showcased were incredible. I think you had a really great Spanx presence. Jesse Itzler was incredible. One of the best
Insane.
keynotes like I've ever seen. I think I got emotional, and I think that event really set the stage for connection, brand partners, like you mentioned. So I just wanted to give a little shout out to that. Anyone who missed it, it's a good opportunity, especially on the brand side, to really dive into everything we've discussed today.
Absolutely. So May 21st and 22nd of 2025, it's not too soon to start making your plans.
It's not. I'd also say I'd never been to Utah, and I will give a huge shout out. It was an incredible experience. Like I absolutely loved it. So
It's a special place. I moved here last summer from Seattle, and if I'm honest, I had no intention of leaving Seattle ever. But the appeal of joining Pattern was just very strong, and so I figured I would try it, and it's been just this unexpected delight. So I love living here.
I did too.
It's
I
a beautiful
immediately like
place.
text my family and I was like, you all need to come visit. Like it's never been on my radar before, but I just had an incredible experience.
Oh my gosh, I love that.
Well, this has been fantastic. Carolyn, again, thank you so much for hopping on so last minute. Super excited to get this out and hopefully we get to connect sometime in the future.
Of course, thank you so much. This was so fun. It was part of my day.
We gotta schedule in more of these. Every time there's something breaking news, you're gonna be on.
I love it. I am happy to be your go-to person.